welcome to How to Make Git Magical. First, a huge thanks to SciFiDevCon for having me participate. As soon as I saw that this was happening, a conference for technologists with a focus on sci-fi fantasy, I immediately submitted an idea because this kind of conference is right up my alley. So first of all, who am I? My name's Hillary Stohs-Krause. I'm a co-owner and software developer at 10 Forward Consulting in Madison, Wisconsin. I'm a coding bootcamp grad, and for a little nerd cred, I made my cats dress up like dragons to my Khaleesi for a Game of Thrones costume party. First things first, I don't think we could do a presentation about Harry Potter without first addressing the fact that J.K. Rowling has made it clear that she holds some pretty abhorrent beliefs. I think the mark of true fandom is the ability to critically engage with what we love, warts and all, and that includes the creators. Most people who've engaged with the Harry Potter universe at all would recognize that what she is saying and the beliefs that she holds about women and trans women are in direct conflict with a lot of the values that are espoused within the literature, and also the values that are held by the majority of the fandom. Ironically, I think actually one of her characters puts it best. We've all got both light and dark inside us. What matters is the part we choose to act on. That's who we really are. And unfortunately, she's been choosing to act on some beliefs that I think are pretty dark. So, everyone kind of has to make a choice in these situations of how they feel it is, right and ethical and in line with their values to engage with a, universe or fandom that has problematic elements. But if we're being honest, most do, And so I think really fans in these kind of situations just speaking up and making it clear that what people involved with the universe are doing or what they're saying is unacceptable is really the best way to push back against those kinds of situations. So to me, programming is magic. Instead of a cauldron, we have a computer. When we mix the right ingredients together, we can create something new and awesome. And when we get it wrong, as we inevitably do sometimes, it often just makes a big old mess. Right? It's Leviosa, not Leviosa. It's very similar to, it's a semicolon, not a comma. Following this analogy, to me, Git commands are kind of like spells that we can use. And if you're thinking, not sure I follow, I'll explain. So these are some of the commands that most of us probably use on a daily basis, right? But they're pretty boring. If we're gonna say that Git commands are spells, typing git push all the time is not very exciting. So let's make it more fun. Before we go further and do that, however, I'd be remiss if we didn't quick talk about the pros and cons of using Git aliases at all. First, the pros. It can make concepts less intimidating. So I do a lot of mentoring and tutoring with a local boot camp in Madison run by the YWCA. And a lot of the students come in with pretty low tech literacy and don't really have a lot of experience, maybe even with computers. And so learning all of these new theories and concepts and, programming can be very intangible. It's really daunting sometimes. Being able to sort of reformat or repackage some of that language or those concepts into familiar tropes or sort of a familiar setting can really help folks to not only understand more quickly, but also it just feels more familiar. It feels less scary. It can also be easier to remember, right? Again, it's something that you're already familiar with. And so if you can kind of make those connections, it can be easier to remember like, oh yeah, okay, so when I do this, it's like I'm doing this other thing that I have more experience with. Potentially less typing. As we'll see, a lot of my Git aliases are in fact longer than their default counterpart, but be that as it may, if you are using git aliases, you can save yourself quite a lot of typing if you want to. I had a former coworker who was a big Vim user, and they had also set up git aliases, and most of theirs were condensing commands down to, in a lot of cases, singular letters. So they were much faster at typing their commands than I was, which I'm sure over time probably adds up to a lot of minutes. And then finally, it's just more fun, right? It's always good to have fun at work. There are some cons. So the first being, of course, they're not universal. The commands that I use, I am the only person probably in Madison, at least, if not a much wider circle, who is using those specific words to run the same commands that everyone else is. This is mostly an issue when pairing, right? Because sometimes I don't even remember what the originals are right away. Like, it takes me a second to remember, like, oh, right, okay, this is what the actual command is, because I'm so used to using my aliases. And especially when you're pairing with someone who is learning Git or doesn't have the same comfort with Git or the same experience with Git, it can be challenging for them to try to follow what I'm doing if I'm slipping into my aliases instead of using the sort of default commands. So, pros and cons. I obviously have come down on the side that the pros outweigh the cons, but, aliases, no matter what kind you do, whether it's for a different fandom, whether it's like my former coworker where you're just shortening the default commands, there's always going to be a time and a place when they aren't the best option to engage with. So just something to keep in mind. I know. We've talked about a lot of stuff, and I still haven't even told you how to set up git aliases. So let's get to the good part. Step 1, open your git config file. Mine is located at root. I assume that's where most people's is located, but should be pretty easy to find either way. Step 2, select your aliases, and then you're going to include them in that git config file under the header alias. So for an example, alias, expected patronum, and then equal to whatever the default command is. That's pretty much it. It's not that hard. The hardest part, honestly, was figuring out what aliases to use for which commands. I poured through this exhaustive encyclopedia of every single spell ever used in a book or a movie that exists online, so thank you to the awesome nerds who put that together. And I think I read through, I don't even know how many pages of spells to figure out the perfect aliases for git commands. And as you'll see, some of them are more perfect than others. A few are a bit of a stretch, but I did my best. So, on that note, to save you the struggle of reading through, hundreds and hundreds of spells, let's go ahead and take a run through my personal spellbook, and I can explain why I selected the specific spells that I did for the different aliases. A note, I had intended to rewatch one of the movies before giving this presentation so that I could refresh my brain on the sort of canonical pronunciation for these different spells. That unfortunately did not happen, so grant me some grace as I try to muddle my way through. And for the purists who do know how they're supposed to be pronounced, my sincere apologies. I'm just going to do my best. So, Accio. This is a summoning charm. I think they most often use it to get their brooms. And I use this as an alias for pull, right? Because I am summoning my code using a summoning charm. Aloha Mora, used to open doors. This one is an alias for checkout, because I am opening a door into a GitHub branch. Aparicium, the spell to make things appear. Git-stash-pop, because I'm making my code appear again after stashing my changes. Engorgio is the engorgement charm, making things bigger. This one I use for merge, because merging oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes increases the size of the overall code base. Deleterious. This is one that I definitely did not know until looking up spells for my aliases. This is used to disintegrate or remove things. So I remember thinking, what's that for? Remote, prune, origin. So in this case, I am disintegrating references to branches that have been deleted from origin. I like to keep my local Git environment super clean. So this is one that I actually use a lot because I'm a little obsessive about it. Epoximize. Adheres one object to another. So I use this for gluing my commit message to my committed changes. Erecto, used to erect a tent or other structure. This is one of those ones that I was talking about earlier. It's a bit of a stretch. I use this for git add because it's like I'm erecting a new part of the branch. Just work with me. Expecto Patronum. Everyone probably is familiar with this one if you've engaged with Harry Potter at all. This is for fighting off Dementors, right? It keeps Dementors from getting too close. We don't really have Dementors in Git, but we do sometimes get files that feel as scary. So reset hard, right, is for when your local branch has just become a big old mess. And so I use Expecto Patronum to hard reset it to either what it was before or what's on origin. And in my head, it's like I'm fighting off corrupted or conflicting files. Expelliarmus shoots an opponent's wand away from them. I use it for git push because I am shooting my code away from my local computer and up to origin. Evanesco is the vanishing spell. So you can probably guess what I use this for. Git stash, to vanish my changes. Hymenio. This one I feel a personal attachment to because this creates an identical twin of an object and I myself am an identical twin. This one I use for renaming a branch because it's like I'm creating an identical twin of my original branch but with a new name. I know I'm not exactly creating a new branch, right? I'm renaming the existing one, but it's pretty close. Lumos turns a wand into a flashlight. A flashlight that shows me my code changes. Reparafarge, another one that I definitely did not know until researching Harry Potter spell words. This one is used to reverse unsuccessful transformations. So I use it for this nifty command here. Check out main, dbschema.rb. I'm a Rubyist. I primarily work with Ruby and Rails for my backend language. And this is super handy if multiple folks have been working on the database at the same time. And so there's been multiple migrations, meaning that the schema file that's on origin might be very different from the one that I have locally if they all merge their code since I last updated mine with main. And so this is a handy command that I would run that will sort of give me whatever the schema is on main, and it just kind of helps me avoid conflicts and database migration errors. Mending charm. Reparo. This is for mending a insufficient or wrong commit message. Revelio, used to reveal concealed objects, as in the files that have been changed since I last made my commit. And last, but definitely not least, Avada Kedavra. I use it to kill my branches. I will say, even after like 6 years of using these Git aliases, I still feel very powerful and a little evil whenever I type this. I would love, by the way, to, if any of y'all decide to do this, whether you're doing it for Harry Potter or a different fandom, I really would genuinely love to hear what y'all come up with, because I'm sure there's some folks that could do some pretty creative things with Git aliases and sci-fi fantasy. So please do not hesitate to reach out to me if you decide to give this a try. In conclusion, I love magic and programming. Thanks. Hope you'll enjoyed this. Like I said, email is hillarysk at... Oh, I forgot the at. That's hilarious. Well, it's hillarysk at 10fdbu.net. And if you're interested, too, in the list of the aliases that I used for Harry Potter, that link is to a blog post that I wrote when I first created these aliases about 6 years ago. And it includes those instructions for how to set up your own aliases. So tinyurl.com/Harry-Potter-GitHub. Thanks all.